Talk 49.
Dr. Kathryn Ferry is a seaside historian. Dr. Kathryn Ferry, welcome to Talk 49.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. You are very much a beachy kind of person. You love the beach, you love the sea, you're interested in everything connected. How did this all begin?
Well, the funny thing is I should probably make an admission that I don't actually like swimming in the sea or lying in the beach or lying on the beach. What I like is all the history and the social, architectural, cultural background to why people have been going to the seaside for the past 300 years. And it's quite an underexplored history. In England, we were the first country really to invent the modern seaside, and there are a few people working on that, but it's always been seen as quite an ephemeral thing, not taken very seriously in academic circles. And I just like the fact that it's something that everybody has an experience. Everybody has been to the seaside.
You mentioned
families have
You mentioned the word ephemeral. Could you just tell us what that means? We're not so...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, ephemeral means kind of not serious, I suppose. In history, it's a bit of a sideshow, I suppose. It's not political history. It's not about the main kind of big things that are happening in nations, and it's about everyday people and their experiences. That's what interests me.
Everyday people, we're everyday people, and when I was young I used to love going to the beach. In your experience over the last 10-20 years, has the seaside changed or developed at all in this touristy kind of way?
It has changed, certainly, because in Britain, after the Second World War, people developed a lot more sort of wider ideas about where they might want to holiday. The culture had been for a long time that when the summer came, you would go to the English seaside, and that's changed as it became cheaper and more possible to go to European beaches, to go to the Mediterranean, to go to Spain and other places on cheap package holidays. So the British seaside became unfashionable, and that was particularly the case during the 1970s and 80s into the 1990s. But actually, since I've been doing my research, I've found that British people are returning to the seaside, and there's been a lot of investment trying to change how the seaside looks, making it feel more up to date, adding sort of artworks and cafes and making it feel like a destination again. So there's a really positive change in how the seaside is seen now.
What is the feeling of going to the seaside? Is it the smell of the sausages? Is it the fish and chips? What is the feeling that people like?
Definitely fish and chips is a big thing, and smelling the salt in the air. I think that historically there's always been this idea that going to the coast is good for you. So the first people that travelled to the coast in the 18th century were going for their health. Their doctors would prescribe them a trip to the seaside to to swim in the sea in order to cure whatever illness they had. And that lingers a bit. That people still think that the sea air, we call it blowing the cobwebs away, the sense that, the sea air is good for you. It somehow clears away the sort of polluted air of inland cities and towns, and it does you good.
That's true in a way, isn't it?
I think it is. I think just even thinking that means that you're going with this idea that you're going to feel better when you come home. So, and it's about pleasure as well, isn't it? Going to the seaside, going to the beach. It's about time off. It's about relaxing, sitting on the sands, getting some sunshine, you know, more vitamin D. It's all based on having a good time going to the seaside.
You mentioned that the seaside is becoming popular again. There's new things being developed and so on. Is there a danger to the existing traditional picture of the seaside, like in architecture? Are these traditional buildings disappearing too? All new things, or... Go ahead.
There can be. Yeah, there can be in some places. I would say yes, because for a long time the seaside has been judged, as I said, as not very serious, and the architecture there has not been given proper credit for the impact it makes on people's view of the seaside as a place. And the architecture at the seaside is usually more playful than it is inland because it's about pleasure. It can be a bit more frivolous. It can be well, again, less serious architecture. It's not sort of classical buildings like you might see in a city. It's more fun. But the whole backdrop of the seaside is dedicated to people feeling that they've come to a different place, about escape. And in the rush to update our seaside experience, we are at risk of losing some of the things, some of the places that make it special. So it's something that I feel very strongly about because I've studied architectural history. I love buildings. I think that yes, you need to move forward, but you need to take the best bits of the past with you.
Can you give us an example of some of these best parts of the past, like piers or beach huts, things like this?
Yeah, absolutely. They're both very good examples. I am on the committee of the National Piers Society. We actually have one of these in Britain where we've got nearly 60 piers surviving around the British coast. So, in fact, 61. And a lot of those are Victorian and they need a lot of maintenance, and a lot of them are taken good care of by their owners, but there are some that are very much at risk. There's one in Somerset, which is in the southwest of England, a pier that links the mainland to a little island at a place called Weston-super-Mare, and the owners there have just let it crumble, and it's a very sad sight. And something like that puts people off, you know, because they feel like these places are not looked after, not cared for. And there are also a lot of local people who really strongly want to see that pier brought back into use and who appreciate its heritage. So there's a big campaign, and the local council were going to buy it. But it takes time to go through all the processes of actually getting to the owner. There are lots of steps for a council to go through, so it's been a long road, but we're hoping that in that case at least there will be a positive outcome. But piers are very expensive to rebuild, very expensive to maintain, and you have to have some economic benefit from them as well, and that can be difficult. So it's a juggling act, something like a pier.
Just very, very quickly, in a nutshell, what is a pier? Because most people here have never heard of a pier. Sorry, just very briefly. Yeah. Of
course. So a pier is like it's like a bridge into the sea, but it has no end usually. It's just a walkway over the foreshore, so over the beach into the water. You walk out, you come back again. They were invented by Victorians, and it's a way to go and look back at the shore without going on a boat and feeling seasick. So they have very often, you can get amusements like rides, funfair rides on piers, and sort of penny machines, lots of that kind of thing. But it's also just it's like a walkway, effectively.
Okay. When people go to the seaside in Britain, they can go camping, stay in hotels. And another very British thing was holiday camps, I believe. Can you tell us just a little bit about these seaside holiday camps in Britain?
Yes, there aren't many of these left, but for a period between the 1930s and probably the 1980s, they were a really popular alternative to hotels. And you would stay in a small chalet and you would pay your money up front, and you would, for your money, you would get everything included. So all your meals, all your entertainment, all the sports facilities, and people would be expected to take part, join in teams, join in activities. And they would be usually by the beach, so you could use the beach, but a lot of the focus was about a community holiday, that you'd go to the holiday camp and you'd meet new people, or you might go back every year and meet the same people. So it was a very communal way of holidaying.
A very communal way of having a holiday. That's really, really interesting. Holidays are meant to be good fun. Tell me something. You said that people now are flocking back to the British seaside. Has this something to do with Corona as well?
There is an aspect of that, because this year people haven't been able to go abroad. So for me, I'm hopeful that people going back to the British seaside this year will see how it's changed. It isn't the place they remember from 30 years ago, if they haven't been going. And new generations of people will see we have beautiful beaches, we have wonderful architecture, we have very tasty ice creams and fish and chips. And I think part of our issue is also about selling our seaside to people from abroad, to let people around the world know we're an island, we have a huge coastline, lots of different places, and we need people in Britain to appreciate them, but we also need to tell the world about how wonderful they are.
This is what you're doing now, isn't it? We're in the middle of Vienna.
Yes.
Can I just one thing, a little bit more about Victorian age. You're very, very interested in the Victorian age, the piers, this architecture. It's all Victorian. How is the Victorian architecture safe, or is it also in danger in Great Britain? We're coming a little bit away from beaches now, but as a general question.
Yeah, well, I think we've moved far enough from the Victorian period that now it does have an appeal for people. So I think in all things it's about generations. So the generation that came after the Victorians, the post-war generation, hated everything that Victorian architecture stood for, because it was the architecture of their parents and their grandparents. And now we've moved far enough on that we can look back and appreciate Victorian architecture, and so it's not as at risk as it used to be. So, but then we've lost a lot in the last 50 years. But I think what we've got, people do appreciate more. We have a lot of Victorian houses, a lot of Victorian urban townscape. People still want to pull Victorian buildings down, but other people are prepared to fight for them. So I think we're in a better place now.
Back to the beach, Dr. Kathryn Ferry. A good way of spreading the message is by reading books, and you've written one or two books about the beach. I know that. What's your latest book, Dr. Kathryn Ferry? What's your latest book about?
My latest book is called Seaside 100, a history of the British seaside in 100 objects. And so I start in the 18th century and I take an object at a time, which isn't necessarily a museum object. There can be buildings, there's donkeys, souvenirs like a stick of rock, which is a long pink peppermint flavoured sweet, and it has the name of a seaside resort running through it, and it's a very traditional souvenir from the British seaside. So I tell the story of each of these things that people relate to the seaside, that people think of when they think of British seaside holidays. And together, it's like a jigsaw. All those things added together make the whole history of the seaside.
Very fantastic. What's the title of your book once again?
It's called Seaside 100.
Seaside 100. So if anybody's interested, all they have to do is to Google it, and I presume it can be ordered and bought from the usual channels, I would imagine.
I think so, yes, should be.
That's great. Kathryn Ferry, Dr. Kathryn Ferry, you've told us lots and lots of interesting things, but I think it's a question of full circle. People are going back to the place where their grandparents used to go on holiday, by the sounds of it. And if your latest book is anything to go by, there's still the donkey rides, the sticks of rock, and of course the sand on the beach. Is that why sandwiches are called sandwiches? Because you always get sand.
It should be, shouldn't it?
Yes.
I believe that the reason they're called sandwiches is not related to the beach, but anyone who's ever eaten a sandwich on the beach will tell you that yes, the sand in between the pieces of bread is a given. So that should be why they're called sandwiches. You're absolutely right.
Dr. Kathryn Ferry, one very, very quick question. Can you imagine anything better than strolling up and down on a beach, looking at the wonderful architecture, or maybe riding on a donkey? Is there anything better than that?
Well, for me, that's what does it for me. So I just try to share my passion for the seaside with others and try and inspire people to go back and see what I see and enjoy the traditional pleasures of the seaside and enjoy some of the new pleasures that people are creating as well at the moment.
You're very good at giving the message across, Dr. Kathryn Ferry. Just for the very last time, your book is called, once again?
It's called Seaside 100, A History of the British Seaside in 100 Objects.
That's very, very interesting. Dr. Kathryn Ferry, all the way from England, thank you for talking to Tram 49.
Thank you.
Talk 49.